Is your existing supply chain and logistics consultancy provider failing to deliver? Our experienced, thought-leading team at Loguru could be your choice for an intelligent and friendly professional supply chain. If you have a challenge in supply chain, procurement or logistics, or maybe just want to improve the value you get from them, visit loguru.co.uk. Complete end-to-end satisfaction guaranteed.
Coming up in this episode.
Well, how does the product get onto those? Oh, well, that's okay, because the warehousing team will deal with that. They'll take all of this standard production, they'll magic it into a beautiful marketing pack that we can just drop straight into the store.
The Logistics Collective podcast is a series focused on the logistics industry, where there are many incredible stories to be told. We'll be speaking with those who've worked and are working within the industry today. What have been their experiences, good and bad, since joining? And would they recommend a career in the industry to others? Here's your host, Malcolm Pope.
Hello and welcome to another Logistics Collective podcast of the flavour Alas. And it's myself, Malcolm Pope, and Keith Holdsworth here to talk about all sorts of nonsense associated with logistics and supply chain. And our last episode we spoke about forecasting and demand and all of the trials and tribulations involved in that, as well as giving some hopeful wisdom and suggestions as to how to improve. In this episode, we're going to, I call it the destination of all errors, or the destination of all mistakes, which is arguably logistics and warehousing. And the first thing that we're probably going to argue about, or discuss at least, is how much of a core process is logistics and warehousing in businesses. Now, it's clear that for logistics providers it is. It's absolutely at the core of what they do. But when we're looking at manufacturing and retailers, is it treated as a core process? Is it really treated? So, without further ado, I want to welcome Keith.
Hello, Malcolm. Great to speak to you again.
And how are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
And your beverage of choice of today is?
It's coffee again. I've gone for the instant variety this time. Something that might be referred to as gold in its label, and used to have fantastic adverts in the past.
Oh, come on! It's just Nescafe Gold. Let's just let's just be out and proud in terms of our choice of coffee with interesting adverts during the 80s and 90s, and clearly other brands of coffee are available.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
But what about your snack of choice? I mean, last time it was nuts.
Yes. Well, that's still sort of available, but I have to confess that on Father's Day I received a rather large jar of Joseph Dobson's Yorkshire mixtures.
Oh my God, that's huge!
Yes, yeah. It's like a proper sweet shop sized jar of Yorkshire mixtures. I dread to think how long it's going to take me, or indeed whether all of my teeth will fall out before I get to the bottom of this jar. But no, I introduced the family to them on a trip to York, maybe about 6 months ago, and since then they've become a little bit of a family favourite. So I've now inherited a jar of these that I have to keep in the office, otherwise the kids would just devour them. So yes, I have those. I do have a slight problem in that they take me quite a while to get through one, in terms of they seem to last forever and slowly dissolve in your mouth. So that's probably not the greatest thing for a podcast. So I'm going to have one, in fairness.
No, go ahead. It'll add amusement to the listener, I'm absolutely sure. So this week, no fancy coffees or anything like that. It is simple Pepsi Max produced from a soda stream.
Excellent. You see,
so there you go.
So is a soda stream classed as being environmentally more efficient than actually?
Well, it all comes down to the calculations, really, doesn't it? I mean, it's whenever we look at anything associated with is something environmentally better or not, whether it be from electrification of vehicles and going up. I'm never satisfied with the view that we give as a justification is on an end-to-end basis. Yeah. Is this really, in terms of its full life, and looking at everything from digging the bits up that you need to to actually build something with all the way through to its end of life? Have you taken everything into account? I just wonder how good we are all at that, and I think there's a big case to answer. Maybe that should be for a future episode.
Yes, I shouldn't distract, should I? But yes, I completely agree with you that end-to-end measurement of such things would be kind of the only way to really get there, wouldn't it?
Now, I've got some arguably unhealthy snack, but it's KP peanuts of the salt and vinegar variety.
I didn't think those still existed.
Oh, they do. They do. Salt and vinegar does exist.
So I hear you coughing and choking, and I know what you're struggling with.
Fade away peacefully. So, what is this about? Is this trying to adopt the logistics and warehousing function out of the orphanage? Is this what we're trying to do? What do you think about the idea of logistics and warehousing? Is it a core business process, and is it treated as such? Maybe start with, is it treated as such first?
Yeah. Is it treated? I have to confess that in the vast majority of organisations where I've been privy to insights on logistics and warehousing and the planning of such, the execution of it, I don't think it exists as a core process. There is potentially a slight difference between a retail perspective on that and a manufacturing perspective on that. I think almost exclusively, if you are a manufacturer of products, the focus tends to be on manufacturing footprint. And really, how do I get this brilliant product that I've just made? And that's my core business. This is where my brand exists. Or I think that, for a manufacturer, logistics and distribution is very much an afterthought. I think from a retail perspective, I think that there is so much pressure in making sure that product is available that actually there is perhaps a slightly enhanced view of how important warehousing and logistics processes are to make sure that on-shelf availability is sound. So I would maybe make a slight distinction between those two channels. And of course, I think, as you said in the intro, for a logistics service provider, clearly it's a completely core part of the process. I think that there are a lot of, certainly from a manufacturing perspective, there are a lot of things that companies do try to think about, maybe an overall sort of cash flow, inventory level perspective. But I still think that from an actual operational perspective of logistics, I still think that is assumed that it will just happen somehow. There are some magic fairies that sit in the warehouse and kind of do this stuff to make sure that our product will always be available. I hopefully that sort of gives you a perspective of where I think I'm at on this, Malcolm.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think they are logistics fairies or magisticians, as I might want to call them, that are of infinite capacity, infinite foresight, and just miracle workers in terms of correcting all of the other delays and issues that might have occurred further up the supply chain. I want to give them due credit for the wonderful job that they can do. But if you're looking at logistics and warehousing as a function and making a decision as to whether or not it's a command receiver or a key business decision influencer, if we were looking, in your experience, at a number of areas, so for example, forecasting and demand, would you say for forecasting and demand planning, is it just receiving commands, or is it generally involved as an influencer of business decisions in S&OP?
There's almost two answers to that, I think. The first part is it is definitely very much the command receiver type of role within the process. If I think about S&OP, the start point is always to try to create an unconstrained forecast. So you're assuming that in the operational business, you can react and deal with whatever gets thrown at you. And only as you go through the supply planning steps and review them in supply review, would you get to a stage where people might start to throw constraints on you, whether that's a manufacturing capacity or a logistics capacity or a truck capacity or those kinds of elements. You'd only ever expect that as a secondary step of the process. So I think fine to, in essence, become a command receiver, certainly on the first cycle. But what I would then expect is that if there are constraints that need to be applied from a logistics and warehousing perspective, that those are then dealt with in the future to say, do you know what, we need to change something about the way we expect our demand can be serviced. I'm going to go and find some additional capacity, or I'm going to go and deal with it in a different way. But I think the challenge that I have is that I don't often see logistics and warehousing represented at the table in the supply planning and the supply review steps. I think that is almost, I would say, almost fundamentally sitting just in manufacturing and in procurement. Those tend to be the people that do end up with a critical seat at the table when you're doing your supply planning and supply review, because you're talking about, can we make it? Can we buy it? Can we get the materials that we need in order to make it? It's those types of conversations that are happening. And the logistics and warehousing process is just there as an afterthought to say, we assume that we're going to be able to get this through the warehouse. We assume that we're going to be able to get the trucks available to deliver it. We don't think that there's going to be a labour shortage for us to be able to do the picking process that we need, etc., etc. So I think the process is kind of fine, but I don't think that logistics and warehousing are very well represented within that process.
What do you think is the root cause of that? Why has it ended up as a bit of an island?
I mean, apart from the fact that we've got a brilliant history of achieving whatever has been thrown at us.
That's a really good point. So is it that you have to fail for you to be part of a core business process?
I think that could be true. I think I have seen examples where, when storage capacity has become such a constraint, such an issue, then it starts to appear within the topics that get discussed. I think until it becomes an issue, it's fine. Everybody is quite happy to not have to talk about it. I mean, it reminds me, in some respects, I suppose, of pre-COVID times. How often was supply chain in total one of the conversations that occurred at the C-suite level, and then all of a sudden it's become almost one of the critical elements to discuss at the C-suite level because of the fact that supply chains got challenged and broken so much because of all of the impacts that COVID brought to it. And, I think logistics and warehousing is one of those topics that, unless it has to be talked about, it tends to be assumed is going to be okay.
So we're a utility. You flick the switch, it turns on. You turn the tap on, water comes out.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, you hear of the bullwhip effect of, you've got consumer demand that becomes orders from an outlet or a retailer on a supplier. You then go for a supplier's shipments, and they're a bit more noisy. Then you go to how you're going to manufacture it. That becomes a bit more noisy. But the logistics part of responding to the peaks and troughs that actually come through that process is usually just expected that it will happen. And I think part of the art of this is to try and understand, well, where is my sort of average flow that I'm going to have to deal with? What's my peak and trough of flow that I might have to sort of deal with? And am I actually covered in all of those instances, all of those circumstances? And I don't think very many S&OP processes will talk about logistics capacity anywhere along the way, whether it's storage or whether it's distribution capacity. I don't think that it comes up in very many processes.
It's fascinating. I think often where I do see it begins to get to the table, I do believe it is either you have a crisis or that you've got somebody responsible for, if you like, the physical distribution that is pushy and decides to want a seat at the table.
Yep.
And perhaps uses some of the examples of we could have done better in order to be able to claim that seat at the table.
Yeah. I think you're right, Malcolm, because I don't think, we don't often ask for the right information. If I think about the way that we start from a sales forecast and translate that into a net demand, and therefore what are we going to produce, and we might project an inventory that we're going to end up having in our warehouse, that might be one dimension of it, the finished goods inventory level. And the amount of sales that we maybe expect might be one key piece of information that the warehouse needs to deal with. But do we then add on top of that anything about a geographical requirement? Is it important whether or not we're trying to sell it to customer A or customer B? Is it important whether or not we're talking about an awful lot of, say, picked volume rather than big pallet dispatching? Is it important whether or not we're going to have to deal with full truck shipments or lots and lots of small parcel type shipments? We tend to ask, or we might get given some of this information, but we don't necessarily ask for anything about the granularity of it to be able to actually make the correct decisions about our operation. And there'll be all sorts of things in there. Inventory holding is great, but how much spare space do we need to apply in a warehouse in order to still be able to operate? And that's on so many different levels, whether it's locations, loading bays, marshalling areas, the impact on yards. It's the whole lot. I just don't think that we think about enough of those considerations.
And I think that maybe a little bit later on, we're not going to be totally blameless, perhaps as a function, because there is also a responsibility for us to advertise and market almost ourselves and what our needs are. And we'll come to that a little bit later. But Moving on from the sort of forecast and demand piece, what about sourcing and procurement? I mean, again, I have to relate, having being a category lead on a couple of occasions, that I'll sit with my direct procurement colleagues and then look at them with some wonder when they don't understand what Incoterms they're trading on. What's been your experience of that?
I got a slightly more favourable experience, but I know that a lot of the companies that I've had my more recent experiences with have been very, very tight on their cash flow management. So understanding the amount that they're buying, on what basis, on what terms, where do we take title, what's our payables balance that we've got on the purchases that we're making, I think has actually been something which, my recent experiences have been quite good. It's obviously something that I try to advocate when helping people look at their S&OP processes. The one thing that I would then still build on top of that is that you will still get some products where maybe you've just arranged to buy 20 containers of a product, and you give the requirement to a supplier who will actually send 20 containers at one go. They will probably hold back the first 5, the second 5, the third 5 until they've got 20 containers available, because that's what you've ordered from them. But then 20 containers arrive in the port, and all of a sudden you're paying a demurrage charge because you're going from 20 down to 15, down to 10, down to 5, because you can't deal with the fact that all 20 have arrived at one go. But where's the simple communication to say, actually, I'm going to give you the PO for 20, but collectively, it's in both our interests for you to ship 5 every week rather than 20 in one go in the month. And I see so much of that's just kind of cost and operational complexity brought about from something which could have just been resolved by a proper conversation and a bit better collaboration. So from a procurement side, maybe we're quite good at doing the calculations of what we need. We're not brilliant at end-to-end connecting and saying, let's make some of this be able to be a bit more effective when it comes to the flow of those goods through the process.
Absolutely agree. And the sort of bit of logistics warehousing that should be facing our sourcing and procurement colleagues should be something called inbound logistics. And certainly within FMCG manufacturing, my experience of it is that it was the Cinderella of the logistics function. It just sort of sat there. It wasn't anybody's key focus. And there's a huge amount of value to be achieved in terms of making that, from a logistics perspective, the make or buy decision, which will impact then in terms of which Incoterms you're actually selecting within that. But I absolutely agree. The sort of scheduling, phasing of inbound materials is absolutely key. I think there's also a lot of hiding behind extended payment terms on occasions. So I don't think we actually look at working capital finance as expressed through logistics in a particularly dynamic or clever way. But perhaps that's for another day when I can maybe we'll do the insomnia edition for that one. I think.
If I may just add though, I have seen at its best, I've seen a very specific focus on, if you understand the inventory, your projected inventory of what you are going to need through your operation, and you can say, what's the value of the stock that I know I need to hold at a very, very simple level. If you can make your supply chain net neutral in terms of cash, because you can get the equivalent length of payment days on the inventory that you're holding, if you can make that net neutral, so the only thing you're having to worry about is your sales, collection and receivable process, then in some ways you're using your suppliers to fund your own inventory within your chain. I know that there are clearly challenges, and when people have been struggling for cash, you have to deal with that in a different way. But keeping something which is cash neutral as far as a supply chain from a procurement and inventory management perspective, I think is a very good target to at least try to achieve. So that's just I'd always try and advocate getting to that point.
So Keith, it wouldn't be an edition of ALAS without a 3-letter acronym. So I want to talk to you about the letters. Today's letters is the letter N and the letter P and the letter D. NPD, new product development. Do you feel loved and hugged in your career? Have you felt loved and hugged by a new product development process?
Only once.
Oh,
but I can actually recount, the fact that yes, there was one time where I had an NPD process which made me feel, as a supply chain operator, manager, director, I felt as if I was included in that process. What I'm thinking about particularly here is that, rather than supply chain, logistics, warehousing being an afterthought where, the product is, you've been asked to ship footballs around, but you've been asked to inflate them all, and therefore you're shipping so much spare space around, or pyramids of packaging, or whatever weird and wonderful designs that we might be able to think of and creatively say, this will look brilliant on the shelf. This will be a real marketing gimmick. This will be the make and break of our business. And then suddenly you realize, actually, you're shipping so much spare space around that, the costs are just trebled from a logistics perspective. And I have been on the receiving end of some of those weird and wacky, wonderful decisions. But equally, I have seen the opposite side of that, where right from the concept generation, products were designed in a way that made complete sense in terms of being able to efficiently transport them around, store them, etc., make the lowest possible cost of supply chain and handling to deal with them. So I've seen the opposite extremes. So but only once have I seen the nice huggy feely kind of process.
Yeah, my heart goes out to you, but I've probably had a little bit more success than that. I've had probably something like 3 or 4 occasions whereby it has really involved. But in addition to the design aspects, the thing that I look at most often is the ability of NPD to actually suck the life out of your logistics budget. What do I mean? oh dear, we didn't plan correctly, we haven't reported correctly, and please can you air freight this around the world in order to get it to its destination at 20 times the cost it could have actually done if we all would have got our ducks in a row, so to speak.
Oh yes, I've had those ones as well. Yes, the air freight. We've got this great product. We're going to launch it as fast as possible, and then all of a sudden you realise that you're not quite as far down the development pipeline as you thought you were. But it's okay because we can make it up because we can air freight it. And then the one that's left holding the can is the one that's got the $5 a kilo bill instead of the 30 cents a kilo bill. I've been in those as well.
That's interesting. I mean, the truth of the matter is NPD is a key and critical process for any business, and we absolutely get that. I think all we're probably craving and inviting is involvement, Don't leave us standing in the corner.
Yeah, I think, I've seen supply chain involvement in the NPD process, but again, it's one of those things that tends to focus on a procurement. Can we get the materials? On a manufacturing, can we make it? And the logistics and the distribution part of that process just doesn't seem to get the consideration. And quite often that might be, you've got a certain, you might have a handful, maybe one or two people who are representing supply chain at that table. And you've got to try to make sure that those people have got such a holistic view of supply chain that they can bring logistics and warehousing challenges to the table as well, not just manufacturing and procurement type of challenges. In fairness, the cost that we spend on manufacturing and procurement as a proportion of the goods is probably a much higher picture. It's just that you need to be able to consider all of those dimensions, really.
Well said. So let's sort of stay a bit with NPD. Let's talk about packaging design. I mean, you just said the inflated footballs view within there, but I mean, anybody that's worked in logistics and warehousing has had the experience of the difficult to ship product. Those that the pallet is going to fall over, those that are going to perhaps be more susceptible to damage. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think packaging is often used, it's part of the brand, whereas we take perhaps a more utilitarian view of it, is that it needs to get to the product to the customer undamaged and without loss.
Yeah. Perhaps that's one of the things that we should add into the mix, is this idea of shelf-ready packaging as well, or retail-ready packaging. If you're thinking about consumer goods, the fact that what you're actually trying to provide is something that protects the goods, something that enables it to get through the supply chain. But let's think about the extended supply chain of the person who's then got to stack the product onto the shelf. How can they do that as efficiently as possible, so that you've actually sort of taken some of the time and the labor operation out of that end of the chain? That's another critical element. But at the same time, you've got brand managers who are very keen on giving you something which still speaks, rather than just leaving cardboard on the shelf. You got something where you try to still speak in the brand message as well. And all of those, they're not conflicting priorities, but it's just that there's multiple priorities that you're trying to achieve from the same thing. And the sooner that those get into the design process, so that people know what they're working with and then how to make that the best that they can make it, is really the best solution. If you start to try to redevelop these after the event because somebody's designed something which fundamentally makes the rest of it very difficult to achieve, you're on a losing wicket at that point.
Absolutely, for sure. So, are you due a promotion, Keith?
Am I due a promotion? There's a good question. No, but I probably need to be paid more.
You think you should be paid more? Okay. But I was talking about promotional planning, that sort of bog off and all of that.
One of my favourite spikes of demand promotions. I spent a lot of time looking at promotional impacts and how to deal with those. And again, from a logistics and warehousing perspective, there is no doubt that if you don't have the interconnection between these are the events that we're trying to work out versus this is the execution that you suddenly need to achieve. I've seen easily almost 3 months worth of volume shipped in the period of about 2 days in order to fill the pipeline that's required to create the display level that you're expected to achieve on a given promotion. Bring on top of that the fact that there's a combination of fixture display units that sometimes, become prevalent because it's like, well, it's easier if we can just put one of these units into this store for this promotion, which goes, it's like, well, how does the product get onto those? Oh, well, that's okay because the warehousing team will deal with that. They'll take all of this standard production and they'll magic it into a beautiful marketing pack that we can just drop straight into the store. Those types of extra activities that need to happen for promotions are a prime example of where if you don't get those discussed well in your S&OP process, before you know it, somebody's expectation has just gone completely down through and spiraled out of existence, basically.
So, would you agree with the premise that all promotions cost more money in logistics?
Cool. That's a good question. It depends. Does that count as an answer?
I think it probably does. I mean, I think the sort of question I'm trying to come to and maybe get listeners to think about is, how do we measure the effectiveness of a promotion? Because on the sort of saying of turnover is vanity and profit is sanity, if we were looking at promotional activity, it is designed to increase turnover, but what does it do to profit? And what in terms of the business overall? So that profit is going to be a combination. Well, I've sold more, and that is the positive effect. But how much has it cost me to actually realise that, both in terms of manufacturing and supply costs and in terms of logistics costs?
Yeah.
And then what then happens after? Does your customer, basically, who's addicted to your promotional activity, realise your competitor's got some promotional activity and decide to flip over to your competitor? Or if you're dealing with a relatively non-perishable good, you've just changed the location and ownership of the storage location, which instead of being in your warehouse or as a figment in your production planner's head, is actually sitting in somebody's storage cupboard at home. And I just wonder, is there ever, it's the same sort of end-to-end view of, really, is this doing us any good?
Yeah. No, yes, you're right. At the end-to-end level, are there products which are somehow elastic in their demand? So, by having more at home, for example, do you consume more? And if the truth of that is yes, then of course running a promotion on something which ultimately increases the demand is a good thing. If a promotion is all about, there's actually no higher usage. I don't know. You run your washing machine the same number of times anyway over the course of the year. I don't wash more clothes because I managed to buy my laundry detergent cheaper.
Oh, look, I can be cleaner now and less smelly.
Yeah, it doesn't work in that kind of dynamic, does it? It's like you wash whatever you wash when you need to wash it, and whether you bought that product on a promotion, or whether you're a brand loyal and you only wait until there's a given opportunity to buy your certain product. They're all different consumer dynamics, but if the consumption is still the same, then that's when I would tend to support your logic of, well, have you just lost a profitability opportunity because you've decided to run that promotion? But I think they're part and parcel of it. If you didn't run promotions, your competitors would run promotions. So it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? That you're never going to get out of that cycle.
It's a bit like the Emperor's New Promotion. But what I'm trying to say in a very polite way is that I've never, in a fairly long career of working within FMCG, I've never seen an analysis that says, on balance, looking at this promotion on an end-to-end basis, was it the right thing to do?
Yeah. Well, and if I build in for a moment that logistics and warehousing challenge, specifically, I mean, I would say most companies would put logistics and warehousing as a standard accrual, cost per kilo, cost per litre, cost per case, one of those kind of metrics. So for everything they sell, they in effect generate a pot of money to pay ultimately the invoices that come through from the logistics providers for giving those services. Yeah. But actually, when you look at the complexity of it, then if I've got a given promotion where I can deliver at the pallet level straight into a warehouse, which ultimately delivers to a store, that's going to be a different cost to if I deliver at the pallet level, but I have to go to each store instead. And that's going to be a different cost to me putting a display unit together where I get 4 of them on a pallet and I have to go and deliver them into the warehouse, or I have to go and deliver one each to 4 stores. And that's going to be different to putting it in a case where I deliver it into the warehouse who delivers it to the... But those costings, they never get sort of put at that level of accuracy. As far as I can only ever see, you get a cost for, here's logistics, here's how much we sold, let's divide one by the other, and here's a cost per case or litre or kilo, whatever is the most appropriate for your business. And it never really gives the true profitability against a given product. And therefore, you can't really answer the question about, has this promotion really done what it expected to do? Because you don't put the costs associated with that activity. Something like logistics and warehousing, you never put those into the costing of that activity.
And that for me is fascinating because it's something that is very inflationary, has been very inflationary, and will probably continue to be. Energy costs are not going to, they've sort of, the tide's gone out a little bit on it, but the overall sense of direction is that it's going to be, it's going to remain more expensive. I'm just sort of fascinated. I mean, for me I've been a small business owner now for over 5 years, and I'm less interested in turnover, and I'm more interested in the profitability of what we do, to be honest, because it's me. I'm also about the enjoyability and the stimulation that I'm getting out of the work that we're doing, and that's the most important thing. But I'm sort of fascinated as to, our sales figures are good, when we should be saying, actually, the value created or the profitability that we have, or the language is all wrong. I mean, I think equally in procurement, the language is all wrong. It is about savings rather than value.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, I completely agree.
So thinking about your, warehousing and your transportation, it's a bit like a TARDIS, isn't it? It's or other sums. There are some other such time machines available, I'm sure. But in essence, it's infinitely flexible. There's no inability for you to absorb any demand. Is that the case?
Absolutely, of course.
So let's take the tongue out of our cheeks now.
I have a number of TARDISes available, which you can put as much inventory into as you like, really. Yeah, no, clearly it's not, and clearly that's where, when I was describing some of the value that you can get from an inventory projection, this is a critical piece of it, because being able to plan in advance that you might need some additional storage, and go and secure it in the right place, and go and put the right products into it. Because actually, if you think about it and say, I'm going to run out of space in my warehouse in the north, but actually I've got this customer in the south that almost takes a unique set of products. And actually, when I produce those, if I put those in a warehouse in the south, if I found one, then that might actually be a nice way for me to save some overall costs in the process. So let me estimate first based on the plan. Let me estimate first and go and find the appropriate amount of storage for a southern warehouse that I don't normally use. But by doing so, not only do you put the right products in there that don't really skew your costs in a completely adverse way, you've actually preempted the issue. So your north warehouse doesn't completely run out of capacity, and you don't end up at the last minute going to the spot market to say, where can I stick 5,000 pallets? Where can I stick 10,000 pallets? And you're going to end up paying a premium for it. And it might not even be with the same provider. It might not be connected from a system perspective. It might just become invisible inventory, which is really dangerous, because then you start recreating some new inventory to deal with the fact that you've put some somewhere else. All of those pieces that, if you put them into your S&OP planning process, you'll have the discussions 12 months in advance, 18 months in advance, because you say, actually, I'm going to have a storage issue, I think, on the basis of, this is what the guys think they're going to make, this is what we think we're going to sell, and here's the net effect of it. And because you do have to apply into here some of those ranges of, although the guys might think they're going to sell it, do they typically over forecast? Do they typically give me a slightly optimistic view when I look at the longer term? And that's what actually creates some of this inventory that ends up floating around in warehouses. I forget your phrase. Go on, Malcolm, remind me. What's your phrase for this inventory that exists out in warehouses?
Oh, I've forgotten. That's terrible of me.
It's something about unfulfilled dreams.
Oh, no. What I said is that the warehouse contains the unfulfilled dreams of sales forecasts.
There you go.
And it really is. Well, what we're basically saying, we're sort of looking sagely at the sales director and saying, we know where your bodies are buried, and that's the truth of the matter. Is that that's the conscience. But equally, that there are always it isn't necessarily creating an internal war. What we're saying is that there's a balance. It's a bit like, don't exceed the speed limit, and we've all got speed limits. I mean, arguably, logistics has a cost speed limit, but it also has a customer service speed limit. So the view then is that Mr. Sales will be turning around and saying, or most sales will be saying to you, your service is no damn good and it's stopping me from actually making sales. So, there is what should be a friendly interaction. But I think what we're both saying is that we're craving a more integrated and involved position for logistics and warehousing within businesses.
Yeah.
And if we could imagine that nirvana of, being consulted and being involved and able to shape, what benefits do you think it could bring?
I think the main benefits would be the likelihood of you achieving your service aspirations, but at something closer to the standard cost that you think that you have. We said earlier about, these fairies of logistics that manage to make things happen. The truth of the matter is that they make things happen because it kind of has to happen. But in that process, excess of cash has probably been invested in dealing with that problem, whether it's because we've expedited something or we've gone to an outstore, which is more expensive than our normal one, whether we've put it into a different warehouse and now have to move it back into our core warehouse. So we've added an extra leg to the chain. We're burning money. And the principle would be that if you can get those things into your plan, get them incorporated, agree how you're going to deal with them up front, your likelihood of burning stupid amounts of extra money are reduced quite significantly, because you may well find that your core logistics provider, whether or not you've got multiple logistics providers and it's just your favorite one, but someone along the way will give you a solution which allows you to deal with these challenges. Because what we're trying to do is supply, as part of an S&OP process, is always tested in some ways with delivering what's needed. That's still the mantra. That's still the thing we're trying to do. We're trying to remove the constraints that could happen to providing the demand to the customer or the consumer. But we want to try and remove those constraints in the least additional cost to whatever we think is our normal cost. And by giving more notice about that, by planning those things rather than having to deal with them at the last minute, is going to give you a much better opportunity to do that.
I think it's sort of interesting, the names that we give people. And I always say director of sales, I would change it to director of profit. And I think director of procurement, I'd say director of cost or director of value. I think that would be better. I think director of value. That it's trying to get the focus that is, what, if you're a shareholder, would you want that business to do? And what you would aspire is that it's like a well-oiled collaborative machine that is totally focused on delivering great service to its customers and delivering shareholder value.
Yeah, exactly. But, you might even consider, are they all just directors of profit?
Yeah. Not
profits of doom, but all of that. Are they all just directors of profit? And if you had what would be the single mantra that, if everybody in the organization were pushing along the same lines and you were providing the relevant forums and data for people to be able to understand how all of those pieces interact together, that's what SNOP is all about. That's how you're trying to get everybody to align into something that generates the best profit for the business.
And there was a little tinge of frustration there because, I think that almost sounded like, well, in spite of all my best efforts, but I get and agree with you. I pondered the thought about a director of forecasting. If he or she was a prophet, that would work actually really well. So you could have profit and profit. But there you go. So, do you think the greater organisation that we refer to, this the bit that maybe doesn't involve us and doesn't like us so much and steals our lunch money, do you think they understand what we do at any level of detail?
No, but I would argue that they don't necessarily need to understand it at the level of detail. If you talk about micromanagement of every element of the business, there is a absolutely core belief in my mind of, people do the things that they're meant to be doing, and the responsibility and creating the team that are capable of delivering the right thing for the company, it will always be the way forward. But having a bit better understanding up front of some of the challenges that logistics and warehousing faces, so that they become sensible discussion points in a forum which is going on about the total high level business, I think is where a bit more understanding about the sorts of challenges that do come along are that will be absolutely relevant. And that's maybe where we don't do, you said earlier about, we don't necessarily do a great job of actually explaining these things are the difficult things that you throw at me that I overcome, but this is the impact of what you've given me. Whereas if we talk about this in advance through part of the long-term plan, then I think I can do a better job in resolving those challenges. And you won't have to deal with the short-term noise because I'll have already sorted it out before we get there.
I'd certainly agree that. I don't think that I would want people to have a detailed technical knowledge of, let's say, logistics and warehousing. But similar to if somebody drives a car, I'd like them to know the rules of the road, and I'd like them to understand what the car is telling them through the dashboard. And that for me is that amount of knowledge. But I would absolutely accept that generally within organisations, we have these operational silos or functional silos, and there is not enough crossover and education across them all. And it's surprising to be saying that 20 years on or more from that being it's a point of fact that we still have these internal barriers, and I'm still not inclined to accept them. What do you think we should aspire for? If we're sort of looking at that, what's the aspiration? Is it a more connected and intelligent supply chain with logistics and warehousing at its core? Is something that's new? Because this is all about, we talk about fulfillment. I mean, the large e-fulfillment businesses are all about realizing instant customer demand.
This is perhaps linked almost back to the very first question about it. Sort of depends what kind of business you're in. If you are in e-commerce and the requirement and the customer expectation is next day delivery, or at least I have next day delivery available, I might not choose to want that. I might go for something that's longer and slower and cheaper. But if I want to have an expectation kind of satisfaction, so I've done the right thing for the consumer of my product, then sometimes that's absolutely 100% going to need a massive focus on logistics and warehousing operations to be able to achieve it. When we think about some of the biggest e-commerce retailers, that is absolutely why they're so critical. This is something which is so critical to their operation. If you've got something which is slightly longer term perspective, and maybe actually you're much more into a manufacturing or even a make to order type of process, these elements about fundamentally, I've now made this product that you ordered from me ages ago, and now I'm going to deliver it to you. Then it probably is much more of an afterthought. So it's very specific to the type of business that you're actually operating. But assuming it's whether we're talking consumer products or other kind of key markets that are trying to get to a lot of distribution points because they've got consumers which are very disparate. I think supply chain and logistics just needs to be a bit more at the forefront of what people are thinking about. We've been reticent. We've kept in the sort of the shadows. We've not been very good at telling people what we need. We've not been very good at sort of saying, please invite us to the table. And I think on the reverse of that, people need to be a bit more open-armed about, we think that we could make a better job if we had those people at the table. And I think that that's more about a cost of doing it, because historically speaking, I think we've probably still achieved it, but we've spent more money in doing so.
I'm sort of thinking back now, probably to, I think it was Yorkshire Television that used to have Jack Hargreaves on there, and he used to be sat in his garden shed and he used to be whittling a stick or something like that, or talking about, I don't know, something about how you plough a field or whatever. And it was sort of like a charming view of country life past, but to be honest, as a kid, pretty boring. And I just wonder, in terms of our utterances in terms of this, if we're thinking about AI and what is coming forward, will it be at some point that this is going to be like a bucolic memory, as logistics GPT is actually controlling all of our supply chain? Or, to be honest, I'm quite disappointed with the application of AI. I only got hopeful last week that we're trying to improve heart surgery, and I thought, oh well, okay, you're trying to take on a meaningful challenge, whereas most of the time I think AI is not. But maybe we're safe. Maybe we're safe from the garden shed, Keith.
If I consider the application of AI, I do believe that there are a number of, particularly in terms of the demand forecasting piece, where I think that there are probably a multitude of inputs that we maybe don't consider that actually help to explain the demand. And at the end of the day, if we could get a more accurate view of what the demand will be, it kind of helps the back end of the process, and all these people are trying to respond to whatever is going on. Just gives you more of a chance to be able to do that as efficiently as you can do, rather than, as I say, you solve it, but you probably become incredibly inefficient and you've spent a lot more doing it than you would have ideally done.
So we started potentially in the orphanage, and we've now gone via whittling sticks and a long discussion in terms of whether or not warehousing and logistics is at the core of the business. I think, in all honesty, we feel that it should be, and it needs to probably do its own work in order to persuade to gain that position at the core. And we're finishing up in terms of AI maybe. I mean, maybe this is part of the answer to try and get a better solution. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's that variance between. I actually like some of the error.
Well, I still do believe that even with AI, I do believe that you'll never get. I'm a big advocate. You'll never get the big perfect forecast. You will always end up with some noise. You will always end up with some variation. Understanding the range of the variation is where you create your best plans. Because as long as you can deal with the upsides and downsides and you understand what you're going to do in those situations, that's great. You create the perfect forecast and be able to create the perfect supply chain. I don't think that we will ever get there. There are too many factors that can make something go wrong.
I think again, it's intent to purchase. And when does that happen? And I think you can only hope to bring. So the reality is forecasting is trying to guess what somebody is going to do. Knowing what somebody is going to do probably doesn't give you that much more of an advantage. So whether or not it's 6 hours before or it's an impulse purchase and it's 6 seconds before. But I do begin to wonder, there's a view of brain implants and, do we know what Mr. and Mrs. Miggins are going to do when they're shopping around their local supermarket? What's in their mind to get?
How do you know that? I've got 10 guests coming to stay at my house this weekend, and it's all sudden.
Well, it's in your.
It's gone straight through the roof.
Yeah, but no, it's in your brain. You've got 10 guests coming, so
I do.
Yeah. So, you might argue that there's a very intelligent application in the house that is listening. I mean, we think it's happening already with the likes of Alexa, but arguable. That is actually listening and saying, okay, now, good old Keith has got 10 people round to go and steal his Yorkshire mixture. And we're going to have to prepare for this. And
Bet that okay. Well, they'll be hidden.
They'll be hidden. Never tried to take a Yorkshireman's Yorkshire mixture away, heaven's sake.
Yeah.
So look,
you could York mixture out of a Yorkshireman, but or there's something like that. Yeah.
So we've done some logistics whittling today. Where do you think we should go with this next?
I think one of the other dimensions that I do consider is about how through collaboration we can take what might become one business's plan, join it up with other businesses' plans, and create something that collectively makes a lot more sense and tries to take something out of the overall supply chain effort.
And on that note, I think the message is let's stop solving problems in silos because they're inefficient when you look at the macro position overall. Thinking collaboratively could be a lot kinder to the planet. But beyond that, I'd like to thank Keith for his input and involvement today. He's kept me entertained, and I hope he's kept you entertained. I needed help because I'm not that entertaining. So I'd like to draw this episode to a close. So next time we're going to be talking about collaboration. So thank you for listening to the Logistics Collective. We're available on logisticscollective.com. And all of the podcast platforms, for example, Spotify, that you may well expect to see us. So please listen to our podcasts and please like and follow us if you'd like some updates. So thank you very much. And it's goodbye from me.
Yeah, and it's goodbye from him.
Thank you. Good night.
You can get in contact by email, podcast@logisticscollective.com, or leave a voice message on our website, logisticscollective.com. The podcast is a production by Loguru.